I'm excited to welcome you to the Advisory Board Insider podcast today because on this show, one of the things I love to do is talk to really fascinating, interesting people. And if you've listened to any of the listened or watched any of the shows so far, you'll know that I'm talking to some people that are doing really profoundly cool things in the world. And today is no different. Today we get a chance to talk to a teaching professor at McMaster University in Canada, and he works in the Booth School of Engineering, and he teaches leadership and management. But he's also an advisor, he's a consultant, he's a guide to many people, and he's got this fascinating journey where he started out in the outdoor adventure stuff, and has really grown into this really cool role. And we're going to talk a lot today about workplace ecology. And I know that you're going to learn a lot from listening to Allan MacKenzie, my special guest today. So get ready. We're going on an adventure. Here we go. Allan MacKenzie, welcome to the Advisory Board Insider podcast. I'm glad you're here.
It's great to connect with you again, Tom, my good friend.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really cool. So you and I had our very first conversation almost 25 years ago. I'd say about 24 years ago, where I interviewed you on my TV show 25 years ago, or 24, I think it was. And I was intrigued by what you were doing at that point in time. And I feel like it's another chance to catch up on all of the amazing things you're doing in your world and in your life. So before we get started, what are your geographic coordinates today? Where are you located?
So right now I'm in my home office, or my home studio, I like to call it, and I'm in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And so Guelph is a little northwest of Toronto, about an hour's drive northwest of Toronto. It's a beautiful small city of 120,000, lots of parks and waterways. And where I live, it's literally a 5-minute walk or a 2-minute bike ride, and we're onto a nice trail by the Speed River and out to Guelph Lake. And it's just a beautiful little part of southwestern Ontario.
Wonderful. So we know where you are. So what do you start your day with? Let's go back and start your day. What's your drink of choice to start your day?
Well, for right now, I mean, it's springtime, so I'm in a little bit of a cleanse,
Oh,
courtesy of my significant other, Carmen. She likes to put us on the spring cleanse. But normally, my drink of choice these days seems to be a hot chai tea with
oh,
coconut milk and frothed up, with a little bit of cinnamon on top. And I just like those mixtures of spices. And it's just kind of a nice, warm, comforting drink to kind of get the morning started.
so is this like your own concoction, or is this a sort of a chai? I don't know. Is it like a tea bag kind of thing? What's the process?
Well, you can get it at your local Starbucks. You can get it there, and
Okay.
sometimes I get it there. But we also have our own tea bags, and we'll brew it up, and then we'll just pour it in with the mixture with the coconut milk, and it's just and then heat it up and then froth it up, and it's great to have.
Give it.
But
So,
this morning you got me in my be happy mug, just having water. So
oh, got it. Okay. So,
and there we go.
give me a sense. Oh, that's great. Give me a sense of what your day starts like. And I realize, because you're a professor, a teaching professor, you may be in a different space now in summertime than you are normally. But if you could sort of average your days out, what's the morning look like? What's your morning routine typically look like?
The morning routine, even when I'm teaching, I try to get my classes a little later in the day because I like to kind of come into the morning sort of in a relaxed fashion. We have quite an extensive backyard with lots of trees and perennials. And for whatever reason, our backyard is taking the interest of all the local wildlife. And so our morning for both of us is, having a nice tea, but we're usually racing around, feeding the birds. We have chipmunks who show up to our door. We have, squirrels. We have a special squirrel. Of course, Carmen has named them all Winnie. And Winnie is a pretty special Zen squirrel. She came around 2 years ago, and she sometimes comes in and sits in our kitchen Well, we're eating breakfast and she eats her breakfast there too. So
Wow. Wow, that is
yeah,
interesting. A squirrel for breakfast. It probably gets,
let's
as
go
the
for
squirrel
breakfast.
bites some chai, latte?
Yep, and, no, it usually goes for the walnuts and the peanuts and those types of things. The other
Got it.
thing is last year, just unbeknownst to us, one day this little fledgling northern starling came in and took a shine to Carmen, my wife, and also to me, and we started feeding her, and she hung around all summer. She left for the fall, she migrated, and we thought, well, maybe she'll be back, maybe she won't. And, sure enough, she came back literally 3 weeks ago and is in the same routine. And so she'll literally land, on our arm and eat some, we got the mealworms that we've got for her, or raisins, and she'll eat those. She's now feeding them to her young. Sometimes if Carmen isn't quick enough, and she leaves the screen door open, it will actually fly in and land on her shoulder, like, kinda hurry up, I want my breakfast now.
Wow.
So,
Fascinating.
my morning, our mornings are pretty busy for the first couple of hours from sort of 6 a.m. till about 9:30. And then the frenzy sort of goes away. And then I kind of drift into my professional day. So it's a nice
Got it.
interlude into the work life.
I have never heard that before. That is fascinating. So,
Yeah,
let's get a bit of your story. I'm going to dive into your story a bit. So, I looked in your LinkedIn
sure.
profile, and it seems like just before 1984. So, I'm thinking, early 80s is probably end of high school zone for you, wherever that is. But just kind of go back in your mind there. What are you thinking about? What's the plans for the future? What is going on
Hmm.
in your world in terms of goals, aspirations, and where you're thinking your life will take you?
Yeah, that's really going back a ways. So it
Yeah.
is, making the gray matter work. But certainly in my early years, I mean, I've always had a love of the outdoors and exploring nature and wild places. And I wanted to be, an outdoor guide. So taking people on canoe trips, rock climbing, mountain climbing. And so even in my high school years, I was taking courses and training and trying to go out and do things on my own. We lived, my parents lived on a body of water called the Bay of Quinte. It's just east of here, a couple of hours between Trenton and Belleville, because my father was retired from the military there, and so taught myself how to canoe. I taught
Mm.
myself how to cross country ski and all of those things. And then, as I moved into my sort of senior year of high school, I before I really got into going to university and doing those things, I actually went out west and continued my training. I got into becoming an assistant mountain guide. I eventually became a rescue specialist with the Alberta government for a year and did that. And so, I really, because that was really my focus. It wasn't about business at all. It wasn't even on
Right.
my radar screen. I just wanted to spend the rest of my time outside, helping other people enjoy the outdoors and enjoying it myself.
So you learn, you get those certifications and those designations, and then your LinkedIn profile tends to indicate you start down that path of being sort of an adventure guide, an outdoor adventure. Give me a
Mhm.
sense of those early days in adventure tourism, adventure travel. What were some of the deep lessons you're learning early on before even the business thing starts to emerge? I can only imagine there's really intense, cool lessons that you get from rescuing people off mountains, dealing with, these
Yeah.
kind of challenging situations out in the wilderness.
Well, you certainly become an appreciation of your of your humanness. I don't know how else to
Mm.
say it. Whenever I go to the outdoors, I always, if you find yourself filled with ego, just spend some time in the wilderness. That
Yeah.
ego drifts away pretty quickly because it doesn't really care about you as a person. It just does what it does, and you have to adapt. So I think,
Mm.
that leads me to the other one is, how do you adapt to your conditions? How do you recognize when you have capabilities to do things, and when there are times that maybe this isn't the best day to go to the top, or, that thunderstorm's coming down the valley pretty fast. The snow conditions are strange. Maybe it's just time to, stay a little lower and enjoy the valley today. Kind of making those critical decisions that can literally be life and death. And, as opposed to kind of just making general decisions in your normal day.
Right.
The other thing that I I've taken forward into my career is I'm always amazed when I'm helping other people enjoy the outdoors, especially couples. I can tell really quickly in a short period of time, especially if somebody, a couple has been together just for a short period of time. Maybe they just got married or they've been married for a little while, and we're in an outdoor activity, whether that's, climbing or whitewater canoeing, where they have to work together. I can tell pretty quickly where they're going to run into problems down the road if they don't
Really?
address some of these concerns pretty
Well,
quickly, because
that
because
that's
they
that's intriguing.
lose
Give
their
me an
ego.
Yeah, give me an example. Like, give me
Well,
a real world example of that.
so I had a couple, whitewater canoeing. I always enjoy teaching people whitewater canoeing. And before we ever go down the river, we spend a day in a sort of easy set of rapids, and they get used to how the canoe moves in the whitewater. And it's really more about shifting their weight and recognizing the canoe in itself is not necessarily safe. You've got to adjust. It's like on your bike, you've got to move to the movement of where you're going. And so,
Mm,
you'll have somebody in the back of the canoe, the stern of the canoe, kind of calling out the commands and where they have to go. And then the person in the bow or the front of the canoe is really, they're either paddling madly or they're reaching out with their paddle to brace against the waves that are bouncing them around, to act like almost like an outrigger. And it's funny, when I see people, they're trying to communicate with each other, they get into these arguments, go, "No, I'm not gonna do this now," or "That's too late." And they spend their time arguing, and the next thing you know, their canoe's flipped over and they're drifting down the river. And it's just
interesting.
fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we taught that, we would videotape people. And people
Yeah.
wouldn't believe us when, I'd rescue them and pull them back into their canoe. It was pretty standard practice. It's not a scary thing. They get up and do it again. They're soaking wet, but that's the way it is. And I say to them, you've got to really get your signals correct. Oh yeah, we're doing that. We're doing that. And then, later on in the evening, we'd go out to dinner, and we went to this special restaurant near the Madawaska River where we did a lot of our teaching in Ontario. And, we'd put up a TV screen and plug in, back in the day when they're VHS tapes,
Yeah.
and we'd plug in the tape, and they would see themselves and hear themselves, and they would just be astonished at how
Mm.
poor they were at communicating, or that they were kind of barking at each other and not really listening. It was really interesting to watch. It was very humbling for them, that's for sure.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. So it seems to me then, and when I first intersected with you, it was with when you had a company called The Adventure Begins. And it seems
Mhm.
like right in that time frame, you were marrying outdoor adventure to business. So what kind of transitioned you into more a business focus versus purely an outdoor adventure focus?
Yeah, so the early days of The Adventure Begins was just that. It was very outdoor focused. It was kind of a training and development company for people wanting to learn outdoor skills to go out so they could experience it on their own. They wouldn't have to go with, in my early years, I would guide people, so they could go out without a guide, whether that was a wilderness canoe trip, to go rock climbing, to go mountaineering, those types of things. So we taught a whole lot of fundamental skills, from climbing to canoeing to navigation, wilderness first aid, those types of things. And then we started to get contacted by corporations, mostly
Mm,
through, people that I graduated with, and they gone on and moved on to their careers, and they were with companies, and, we remained friends. And they're like, "Hey, can you take our group, rock climbing for the day? Or can you go take us on a high ropes course, do some experiential learning?" And so that was the time. we sort of
Mm.
met. We're kind of growing that side of the business. So there
Yeah.
was kind of the for a better word, the public side, and then there was the corporate side that we were growing. And even that morphed again, where all of a sudden people were asking about, well, you seem to be really, yeah, I'll never forget this. We were finishing off one of our climbing days, and one of our climbing instructors, Vic, was going out with a woman who worked at Ontario Hydro. She was a senior engineer and manager at Ontario Hydro. And we would always finish our day with a debrief, and we would facilitate that. Just, what went well, what could we improve on, before we all, went out and enjoyed a beer at the local pub, and just take in the rest of the weekend. And afterwards, I was sitting beside her, and we were having a beer, and she said, I worked at Hydro for 10 years, and I've never seen a manager facilitate a session like you guys do your instructor debriefs. Can you
Mm.
come and teach that to us? And that spawned just a whole other direction. And what that ended up doing in the Adventure Begins was we then became a training and development company, but more in the ideas of soft skill development, how to facilitate a conversation, how to have a difficult conversation, how to bring on new employees, how to deal with um, conflict and give constructive feedback. And so we had these mini sessions, as well as we continued on our experiential learning division in using outdoor activities to bring teams together. Because that was a time when lots of companies were merging, or there was
Yep.
mergers and acquisitions, and they were buying up each other, and now you'd have a whole bunch of people together that didn't really know each other. Uh, How could they come together quicker? And we used outdoor activities and then ongoing training sessions afterwards to improve the output or the performance of those groups and teams.
And it seems like from there, you move fully into the business side, instead of
Yeah.
focusing on the adventure side and using adventure as a toolkit to personal development and even business development. Seems like from there you move fully into business focus, training, development work, support, consulting, those kind of things. So, give me a sense of the journey from there to where you are now as the professor of leadership and management, a teaching professor of leadership and management at the Booth School of Engineering at McMaster University in Hamilton. So, like, there's a whole lot of world in there
Yeah.
from when you and I first met to where you are sitting as a professor now at a major university in Canada. In
Yeah.
leadership, and I get the leadership and that part of it, leadership and management, I get it, but give me the journey because I think it's important for people wanting to know who you are to understand the morphing
Mhm.
of the adventure guy to the business training guy to now a professor of leadership. Give me the short story on that.
Sure. The short story. I'll try to give it a short
Yeah,
story.
I mean,
Well,
it's a
you know, the,
25-year
the
thing, so I get that it's
yeah. So how do we put it in depending on your audience age? The Coles Notes version of this. Well, the adventure begins. There was an opportunity to um, sell that organization, so I took advantage of that, and we actually cast off the two divisions. So we had our public outdoor training, which we sold to another person who was beginning that journey, and that
mm,
accelerated that for them. And then another larger organization wanted to incorporate our experiential, they were doing part of that as well, but more the soft skills training. And so we sold that division to them. And so that left me at a bit of a crossroads. And so, at the same time, I was getting involved in enhancing my own learning journey. I was
yeah.
taking HR and became HR certified. I was working, kind of part time in those areas for a few companies. And one of the things I recognized was there was lots of organizations that really didn't know how to scale themselves. And
Mm,
that was something that, that, and that's found a whole other company that I created, starting with a couple of partners and then eventually on my own, called Empower Business Guides. And that was really dealing with, small and medium sized enterprises and going in and helping them develop the structure around their organization so that they could scale and grow without imploding or,
Mm,
worse, the business owner, getting sick or, worse, having a heart attack, something like that, because it was just too much to look after. And I used a number of different tools to assist with that process. I started that model more on a coaching, kind of guiding perspective. But then again, based on demands, there was more of a demand for us to actually insert us into organizations and actually
mm,
build systems and processes for, maybe a couple of years, or guide the managers and organizations in how to do that. And then we would pull ourselves out. And
mm.
so I did that for almost a decade. And
Wow.
then what happened was I missed the kind of training and development, and I started to get involved in, I became HR certified. I'm an HR certified professional, both here in Canada as well as globally. And I I wanted to give back. And so I got involved in teaching at local colleges. And for your American listeners, those would be institutions that offer associate degrees. So usually 2-year degrees, very hands-on and practical education. And so I
Right.
would get involved in teaching courses to people who are aspiring to be HR professionals. And so I was teaching training development, compensation, strategy, all of those types of courses. I really enjoyed it, but I was doing it on a part-time basis. And then for whatever reason, I caught the eye of a university called Wilfrid Laurier University. Somebody in the organizational behavior department heard about my teaching and asked me to come teach a course with them one fall, which I did. And I really enjoyed that with nature and management course. And then an opportunity came on for a full-time position there, and I took that on as a lecturer and did that for 2.5 years. And then at the same time, my I'm not a linear career path person. I do things, at the same time. I could be doing this, but I'm also doing that. And at the same
Mm,
time, I was also teaching in a program that was just starting at McMaster called the Bachelor of Technology program. And I got that connection because it's connected to a college and the student get both a university degree and a college diploma.
mm.
And so I started teaching there part time as well as I was doing, my full time gig at Laurier. And then the director of that program asked me, he goes, we've been doing this for 5 years. We need somebody to come in and audit all the management courses. It's a really unique engineering program, Tom, because most engineering programs are very technically oriented, but then
Right.
engineers go out into the real world and they realize they have to deal with constraints of time, money. Are they
Yeah.
building a product that a customer really wants? That's not an inward focused all the time. And so the program was developed that taught transferable skills to students in business and management. And it's baked right into the curriculum. They're not, elective courses. And
Right.
so
Right.
this director wanted me to kind of come in and evaluate where it was. And I got leave from my job at Laurier to do it over the summer. And I met with a number of stakeholders and industry people, and then I submitted a whole report. And one thing in that report, I said, you need somebody to oversee this component because all the students take these management courses, it's like 1,000 students, and there's really no one looking after it other than the instructors teaching their individual courses. And then that led to a conversation of, well, would that be you? And I was like, "Well, I already have a full-time job. This is not
That's
a
funny.
part-time job." And then it became, "Oh, we'll have to, put it out there, it's a university, we'll have to go through the whole recruiting process and hiring." I said, "That's fine." And again, we kept the channels open, and eventually it got posted and I was asked to apply, and I got accepted into that role in 2012, January 2012, and I've been at McMaster full time ever since. And I started as the inaugural management chair of the undergraduate program in the Booth School. And I did that for 6 years because that's how long an administrative appointment is. And I passed the baton on. And now I'm fully engaged in teaching and supervising graduate students.
Wow,
So I
that's
don't know if
really
that's the Cole's Notes
no.
version.
Yeah, but I think it's really, it's really helpful to understand the arc of that history from adventure to training to development to those sort of roles that you play along the way that keep informing you on stuff, because it's not like you've been a teacher your whole life. You've been a teacher at your
No.
heart, but you've been involved in different businesses, helping them structure things, helping them set it up, and then coming back and going, I want to teach and train, but still involved. And so I think that really informs where we're going now, which is you're teaching regular leadership and management skills. You've had all this history and experience. um, there's something that stood out on your profile that just caught my attention. And this is where I want to dig in for the next little while, which is
Okay.
you call yourself a workplace ecology strategist. And that term jumped off the page to me. And I'm fascinated by that line. So first, can you define what that is? And then how does that translate to business organizational life? Tell me more about workplace ecology strategist.
Sure. So, I mean, I was looking for something that really fit with my unique skill sets because as you've been chatting, I mean, I have quite a different
Yeah.
journey than most people involved in business. And along the way, of course, I did my education and certifications and got an MBA and did all those traditional things.
Yep.
But I just wanted something that said, there's things that have imprinted me from a very early age that I see value in its transference. So what I do, when I'm not teaching or supervising grad students, I still have a consulting company, which I call Workscape O2, O2 standing for oxygen.
Mm.
And I work with progressive business leaders and their teams to create workplace environments that foster, more engagement, well-being of employees, and improve their overall organizational capacity. And I do this, and why I call it an ecologist strategist is I come from a perspective of looking at the organization holistically and coming from a perspective of nature. I look at
Mhm.
organizations in my mind. I think organizations are a living ecosystem. They are not, and I look at that interplay of a living ecosystem. They're not machines to be tweaked and fixed. That's the industrial age. We're long past that.
Right.
Technology and certainly things from our pandemic, changing the workplace environment and workplace landscape has altered organizations and will continue to do so moving forward. And so it's embracing looking at it holistically. And then what I do is I try to look at kind of through three lenses. I look first at employee health and well-being. I don't like to call them employees. I like to call it talent because, employees right away almost gives that sort of subsidiary, aspect, you will serve me.
Right.
In reality, I like to think of employees as volunteers. If you think about them in that way, they don't have to show up every day. That will change your perspective and how you work with them. Then I
Mm.
also don't want to avoid the things that make organizations tick. What I like to call organizational enablers. What are the systems and processes? How do we structure ourselves? How do we make decisions? How do we create a strategy that's going to serve us, in the short term and also in the long term? And there needs to be alignment with those. And then the last area really brings in my sort of early development, from high school on, is this idea of restorative design built into the built environment. And that's really, in a short sort of cell, is to bring nature inside. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a concept called biophilic design. Have you ever heard of that before?
No, but just the word itself is really cool. So biopheric
So,
design?
no, biophilic design. So
Philic.
it comes biophilic. So it's BIOPHILIA, and it originates from the Greek term, so bio meaning nature, life, and then phila meaning the love of living things.
Mm,
And it's really about, you know, even though we've progressed as a human species, our DNA is really deeply ingrained of living off the land and evolutionary, we that's really where we are. I like to say sometimes we're nothing more than monkeys with car keys.
y-
I mean, we have a primary brain. We sometimes we make these decisions that don't seem very rational, and that's because we're going more from a primordial perspective. And we really have an affiliation with, think about when you want to relax, you tend to go to a park, you look outside, you go to the beach, you go for a walk. You don't tend to sit in a cubicle at a workplace. That's not where you
um,
find that regeneration. So, how do we build elements? Because that really can impact talent, productivity, how people communicate together. It informs how an organization works. So, we can, things like, and there's been a great deal of research in this area. It's been around was popularized by a gentleman. I'm trying to remember his name right off the top of my head. Edward Wilson. He was an evolutionary biologist. He's no longer with us at Harvard. And he kind of popularized the term for about 30 years ago. And, architects, design engineers, people working in the built environment, biophilia isn't new, but for regular workplaces, it absolutely is, especially people in human
mm.
resource or talent management.
So, so
Studies of, have natural light and those types of things in your organization, your office. Go ahead.
yeah, so I just wanted to hit on that because you called it restorative design and then biophilic design, but it's not primarily that you've got a pool table because pool tables and things like that were kind of hot for a while, but you're talking about the very structure of the way the office flows and the light coming in and those things. It's not so much that you've added these cool cultural, what are often called cultural initiatives, which, let's add a pool table and put in a cool, bar in the cafeteria or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fundamentally the
No.
way the layout is, the way the structure is.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not taking away from the pool table or the nice kitchen. That can be helpful too. But do people have access to natural light? We
Mm,
know that improves productivity. What's
mm,
the view from your window? If you can look out over, there's been a great study that it was at a University of Wisconsin where people were in a call center at the kind of administrative center at this university, and half the windows looked out on sort of parking lot and road, and the other half of the windows looked out on sort of the campus green. And then they measured the productivity as well as doing surveys with the employees to find out, how did they feel? They looked at sick days, those types of things. And it was much, much lower for people who had the view of nature looking out their
mm,
window, even though everyone had a view. They just had a different view. There's been some seminal research in the healthcare field that really sort of started this where again, people looking out who were recovering from gallbladder surgery, some people looked out a window and just saw the opposite side of the hospital. Other people in the same recovery area looked out their window and could see greenery, the sort of inner courtyard garden that the hospital had. And again, the people recovering, they recovered quicker. They used less pain medication. They tended to get along better with the nursing staff. They weren't as grumpy with them.
yeah.
Those types of things. So
So,
it's also bringing natural materials in like wood and
mm,
stone. Have green walls. Could you have a water feature? If you can't bring greenery in, can you have kind of texturing that looks like nature? And even how you space things out. There's this concept in biophilia about prospect and rest and refuge. So prospect is you like to see things in the distance. We're on the plane. We've got predators that are after us. That's why houses on a hill or have a good view tend to sell for more money because we feel safer in order to look out and see where things are coming. At the same time, we don't want things coming behind us. So we want a place that's a little cozy, that is private and quiet, that we can regenerate. So
Hmm.
it's kind of finding a balance within whatever the enterprise has to offer to bring in as many of these elements as possible. And not all organizations can do it. Depends on whether it's a brand new footprint that they're building, or are they adapting a footprint, or they are left with a footprint. What are some of the small things that we can do that could bring in kind of this restorative idea into the workplace?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So you talk about these three different elements of the talent and the health and well-being of the talent, the what you called the enablers or the systems and processes, and then this design, this restorative design or biophilic design. So what happens when an organization uh, hears the design part of it, but are limited by capacity because they can't go through and put everybody at Windows because they frankly they're in a crappy building and they don't have that.
Yeah.
Um, you come into that situation as the person who is the advisor or guide, and how do you encourage them? Because ultimately, I think all of this is towards both the health of the employee and the vitality of that employee to support the system that's producing an outcome,
Mhm.
without them being
Yeah.
automatons or anything. But how do you do it in a way that actually gets the result when you're limited by constraints?
Well, it's interesting you say that, and you're right. There is a great deal of constraints within organizations, and not everybody is coming back to workplaces as they did pre-pandemic.
Right.
So I always start with the talent first. That's the first place I look at. And I look at a number of elements. I look first at, what's the physical and emotional health the employees have? What opportunities do they have to, do they get benefits? Do they have, decent breaks? Do they have flexible schedule? Um, does it offer, the environment offer neurodiversity in the sense that, some people like yourself is more of an extrovert. Believe it or not, I'm more of an introvert. So even though we could be working together, we have different needs within the organization. And
Mm.
can that organization accommodate those individual needs to get the best out of that individual? I also look at, whether people are engaged in their work. We're all familiar in the workplace area of the Gallup surveys and the amount of disengagement that's going on.
Right.
Are people able to use their skills and strengths and, to really to apply their role, or even to the point of, I mean, that famous psychologist, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, talks about this idea of flow, where you actually
Yeah.
lose track of time. And I'm not saying every workplace activity is going to be flow, but we tend to have, if we work toward our strengths, we can get there in some of them. I also look at the relationships that people have with their coworkers. Is there an environment of sort of psychological trust going on? Those types of things. Because, personal relationships can really amplify productivity in
Right.
organizations and supporting
Right.
each
Right.
other. I look at whether people find meaning from their work and how do they see something bigger than themselves or their role. And then lastly, of course, is there opportunity for them to achieve? Can they get, more? Can they increase their competencies? Can they get mastery and achieve success? Those types of things. So I start there first, because
Right.
no matter what kind of facility you're in, it really is, this whole approach of mine is very people centric. That's why I called it Workplace O2, because I see the concentric circles, and I'll actually put up a diagram for you because sometimes it's easier to see it. There's a Venn diagram, I'll bring it a little closer, trying to look
Yep.
at it on my screen. There we go that direction.
Yeah.
And
There
I
you
put
go.
O2 in the middle because that's really where those things all touch. That enriches the oxygen. And
Mm,
and that's really about, oxygen is what gets us going. And helps us to flourish. So I start there. And then the next place I go is I look at the organizational enablers. And again, is there alignment? Many times, people talk about, well, I don't really feel like I fit here, or I don't really know what we're about. And then you find out the organization really isn't communicating clearly their vision and their purpose, or they really haven't even codified that in any way that gets traction. I look at, the collective knowledge and skills. Do people have the tools and resources to do their jobs? What's the culture of the organization? What's the leadership like? And what are they measuring? What are the performance indicators? Do they have the right technology in place? And I'm not an expert in any of these things. What
right.
I'm
Right.
good at is facilitating discussions and dialogue and asking questions, and then bringing in other subject matter experts. Let's say there's a technology gap. By no means am I a CIO. There are people who are well qualified to do that. Let's figure out what it is that we need and how do we go through that process. I can help a firm do that. Then the last place is the restorative design. And
Mm,
that, like you said, could really be constrained by the actual facility. So it might be something really small. I'll give you an example of my real life. I work at a university, and universities don't think of restorative design. That's
right.
not on
Yeah.
their radar. I'm a public university, and so it's paid with not all, but a lot of taxpayer dollars and donations from corporations. And my office has a beautiful window, floor to ceiling windows that looks out onto a main road. So it's not great. It's kind of this bluish gray color. I can't grow a plant in there to kill myself. It just doesn't work. So what I've done to kind of bring a little bit of this in is I have just stands of timber, like wood, like like branches. So it's non-living, in a nice sort of vase. I
Mm,
have a little emulator that kind of puts out scents of forest, like cedar and things like that when I'm at the office. So I get that sense of smell. I have a beautiful long photograph of, I like to go to the Adirondacks in upper New York State and hike and climb and bike. And I have a beautiful picture of some of the top peaks in the Adirondacks in the fall. It's a gorgeous picture. And I have that looking right from my desk. And so, and I have native artwork that is more, for a better word, abstract.
mm,
And so it's open to interpretation. So those are small ways that I can bring that restorative design into a space that is really constrained. I can't knock out my walls. I
right.
can't even repaint them
Well, yeah, because you don't
into
even have
another
to
color
right.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
So,
s- so there are ways of doing things for sure.
yeah. Yeah. So I find in my work, which is coaching business owners a lot of the times, not necessarily in
Hmm.
large entities, but smaller ones. Um, I find that by far the biggest challenge comes back to what you said, talent. Like that's the starting place.
Hmm.
That's where all of the pain is, are the people issues. And so a lot of times,
Yeah.
right now in the world, and I'm interested in your perspective on this, in terms of the roles you play and the seat that you sit in the world. Labor, entry level labor is just a nightmare right now for people. I mean, people are really
Hmm.
struggling to find labor. And then as you kind of move through organizations, you get into white collar work, especially, in the high tech sectors and places like that. There's massive amounts of turnover. There's, people are getting hired, and then a year later, they're killing swaths of people. um, and so there's
Yeah.
there's this really complicated world. And so I guess, how does this workplace ecology map to this current reality of the funkiness of the labor markets and the current workplace market?
Well, I would argue, let's take those technology companies, the big ones, Facebook, or sorry, Meta,
Yep.
um, you know, Twitter, LinkedIn, Microsoft. They hired a whole bunch of people when the pandemic was full on, and
Yep.
they hired them from a perspective of, even though they're in high tech and sort of very leading edge firms, from the perspective of the Industrial Revolution. And that
Mhm.
idea of, well, if I want to sell more, I'm going to hire a whole lot more sales or business development people. If we want to get more products out there, we're going to hire a whole bunch more software engineers. The more coders we have, the more products we're going to get out there and the more quality they're going to be. And then when things pull back, they're left with this glove of people that they no longer can afford, and then they have to let them all go. They didn't come from an ecosystem perspective and looking at, okay,
Yes.
how can we build but remain agile in the sense that, do we really need that many people? Or let's look inward. What do people do right now? What would be things in the role that they'd like to step up to? Is there somebody that may not be fully deployed in one of the department, and can we train them to work in this department? Many,
Mm.
many years ago, I did some consulting with RIM, now BlackBerry. And one of the areas that, and this is going back in, recessions before, and they were scaling and trying to grow. And the difficulty that they were finding was, you know, technical people would go out to industry conferences and they would run into other developers and they go, yeah, send in your resume. Yeah, we really need you.
Right.
Then they go back to the office, a couple of weeks would go by and they'd never hear anything. And then they'd contact them and go, well, yeah, HR never called me back. And I was like, well, you're fully qualified. But what was happening was people in HR really didn't, if they didn't use the language on their resume or their CV in the same way that they expected it to be, because they weren't technical experts, they dismissed them as not being good candidates. And
Mm.
so what I did was we took people who were technical people and offered them an opportunity for a short period of time to become recruiters for the organization as a lateral move and as a way to develop other competencies. And in a very short period of time, it helped that need that they had for more talent because those people recognize what different types of code and things that they were looking for because when it was on the resume, they had that experience. We just taught them the recruiting and HR skills, how to ask the right questions, how to ask questions that won't get you in trouble with, human rights and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
How to communicate effectively with your talent or your candidates. So, the big organizations and smaller, you also alluded to small organizations, especially entry level employees. I've seen, we're both mature individuals given by our hair color and things like that. I, when we started off out in industry, people gave us training. We had maybe came with education that gave us a broad understanding of how to learn and we could critically think and do those things. But we didn't have specific skill sets. Companies provided those.
Right.
And that's really gone away in the entry level side of things. We expect people to come, my students are expected to come literally out of the university test tube ready to go. And
Yeah.
that's what companies are looking for. And you're not going to get entry level employees. You've got to come again from their perspective, come from that human centric. Imagine yourself as that young person starting out. Or you didn't have skills in a certain area, what would make you go work for an organization? Well, yes, compensation is one thing. And I'm not saying that you don't want to pay people appropriately, but do you offer training? The other big
Yes.
part is ongoing training, other skill, not just training to your job, but other skill development so that you actually can take care of your own internal brand. Do you get mentoring? That's the other thing young people are
Yeah.
missing in the workplace today. Those are ways that we could really, I think, amplify helping entry level employees and deal with some of the issues that some of these companies are dealt with. They can't come from, hey, I pay you, so come work for me. And that's not good enough anymore. right?
Yeah.
People are looking for flexibility, autonomy, development opportunities, connection. How do you provide those things, even at an entry level? And I, the thing that's going to come back, and I hear it all the time, well, we're going to put all this time and money and effort, and then they're going to leave.
Yes.
Absolutely, as they
Yes.
should. And when they leave, what's the story they're going to leave with? They should leave with a story of, hey, I worked for this cool little company. I did this entry level job. It was data entry. But then they taught me how to do accounting and bookkeeping. Then I went to school at night and I got my, financial advisor certification. And now I'm in banking. I wouldn't have got that start without them. Imagine that story going over and over and over, telling them to their friends and then their circle of influence as it grows and grows. That's just the cost of doing business. And we
Yeah.
can't think of people as machines anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
that that's that's how I see this ecology coming into perspective.
yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing that you've just said, and I think it's a lot of times why smaller businesses often lose out to larger businesses because larger business have these structures that they can take people through a pathway. And one of the things I
Hmm.
say to my clients and people I'm teaching, which is you have to give in smaller business, you have to give your new employees a visual of a bigger future they can have from being with you, right? So there's some bigger future for you, and it may not be here because we're a small business, but if you work with us, you're going to go through a series of steps and you're going to learn some stuff that gives you a bigger future. But I have to map that out instead of the traditional way we did it, which, like you said, we hire a body to fill a slot for 25 bucks an hour. And that's all we think about it. We don't give them
Hmm.
training. We don't give them a future. We hold them at $25 an hour as long as humanly possible because, well, they're just an asset. The problem is these assets show up with an attitude. And if you don't give them a bigger future, then they go somewhere else. So I think it's a really important
Yeah.
distinction as you think about ecology, which is I love your concept of volunteer, but also of how this thing all works together because it makes a difference on how you think about your employees, how you think about your team, how you think about the environment they're in, how you think about the systems and the supporting mechanisms behind that. Um, let's jump into
Absolutely.
yeah, let's jump into a little bit of focus on really what the what the focus of our my this podcast is about, but it sometimes just gets sort of shoved to the edges, but I think it's really important. Um how does what you've seen over the years working in the School of Engineering, because obviously a lot of people leaving engineering are going into really cool environments and you've been at it long enough that you
Hmm.
likely see people who go from being a student to being a VP to being a whatever they end up being, and then they come back and undoubtedly you have conversations. What are you seeing as it relates to this ecology people focus that you uniquely take as it relates to how companies, leadership in companies are thinking about it and getting advice related to this, whether it be in an advisory board or hiring somebody like you as an advisor? How are you seeing that evolve? Are they hungry for this kind of input, insight, direction?
Well, speaking from our graduates' perspective, so yeah, I teach in an primarily undergraduate program,
Yep.
and I supervise graduate students on community projects where they go out in the community and work with the community park. Our students are in a 4.5 year program. And so they actually graduate in December, that they're finished their schooling, and then a regular engineering program goes till May. And when we get to convocation, which is in June, you go to convocation and you meet with the students, they've been out, and meet their parents. It's a grand event. I love going to those. But when I'm having conversations, it's a mixture of the students have graduated from the WBOO school, as well as students who graduated in the more traditional engineering programs, such as electrical, civil, mechanical,
Mm.
who haven't had any business and management training. The first and foremost thing, almost every one of our graduates is employed. In that
Mm.
short period of time between basically January and May, and almost exclusively, what gets them hired, it's like the their technical background gets them the company and it's a tick box. But what makes it work is, oh, you can come from a perspective of management and business. You have an understanding of those transferable skills. I like to think of it as a T-shaped professional. So I'm going to do it with my hands because I don't have a diagram for you. So imagine a vertical axis
Yeah.
is, their depth of knowledge and their technical expertise. And then the T across the top is horizontal transferable knowledge, understanding of marketing, human behavior, finance, strategy. And it's those intermixings that work. And the other thing I see with our graduates, because I keep hooked up with them on LinkedIn, is they accelerate much faster in their careers. You were talking about that trajectory. I'm not saying that engineers don't go on to become VP managers, VPs, and CEOs. Many do. But the accelerated process that our graduates in the Booth School go through that is much, much quicker. I'm a few years ago, we had a student who was the very first Canadian from an engineering school to be hired at Tesla.
Hmm.
And he, in a very short period of time, became a senior manager in that organization down in California within 4 years. Uh, Unheard of in an engineering sort of mixture business and engineering field. And I see similar types of attributes. And so I think, coming from that engineering background, I mean, engineers like to think things are right or wrong,
Right.
they're
Yeah.
black or white, the formula is
Yeah.
correct or it's not correct. And then they come to my classes or my structure, and it's just like, well, it depends. It depends on the situation. And
Yeah.
can you read what's going on? And what I tend to get a lot of afterwards is sometimes during the time they're here, I'll be quite honest, I don't get a lot of, and you quoted this term, a lot of fresh air.
Mm.
They're like, oh, why do we have to take this course, sir? I really like to, build things. I like to build robots, do all this stuff. But then when they get out in industry, I get these amazing letters from graduates. I'm so glad I took your course. You were so right. I have to work in this team. It's complicated. They have different personalities. And I was going back to my course notes on motivation. And to me, that's the greatest attribute I can ever get. So I always like to say I get my fresh air a few years later. I never get at the end of the
Yeah.
course year. I always get it after they graduate. And
Yeah.
so there is a huge demand, going back to your question of advisory boards. I think companies need people who understand the human element and can help other people be open to it. And I'm not trying to ignore it. The companies need to be financially stable. They need to have a good strategy. They need to have great marketing and reasonable technology to do what they need to do. But without the people, who cares?
Right.
What are you keeping track of? You've got nothing. And I think once you start switching your mindset to the idea, just using the words talent as opposed to employees, that right away shifts your mindset. Words are very powerful. Language is extremely powerful. That's why I never really like, even though I'm a certified HR professional, I don't like to use the word HR because it's human resources. Again, you're thinking of it as something like capital. But
Right.
like you said, they go out the door every night, and do they come back the next morning? When you
Yeah.
start thinking about is talent management or, talent facilitation, talent coaching, just that language alone starts to shift things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Have you engaged in advisory boards, advisory panels, think tanks to support businesses? Have you had that opportunity? Tell me a little bit about your experience in and around that.
So I've had it at two levels. So I've had a lot of not-for-profit advisory boards with associations, the Institute for Institute of Canadian Management, the Human Resource Association, Chamber of Commerce's. There's some incubators that I'm involved in at the university as well. And so, a lot of that tends to be either sitting in a sort of committee meeting in that area and providing support and advice. Or as you said, especially these incubators, being on a panel, you're being the guest speaker, you're invited in. For instance, I did, this was over in Singapore and I did it remotely, but I gave, a guest speaker spot for a skills development organization that's global in nature. And it was around most specifically restorative design. But I've also done advisory boards in the, it's so, before I jump on those, one of the things with not for profit is they can be very committee oriented. And,
Mm,
unless you've worked in the academic side of things, I almost like to think of myself as a reluctant academic. I'm not a traditional academic. I
yeah,
didn't study and go from undergraduate to graduate to
right.
PhD to then into university. I worked out in the real world, and I chose in the sort of third act of my career to come and help educate what I felt would be the next generation of leaders in young people, as well as how helping professional practitioners who may be coming back to university for extra training. One of the things that in universities and sort of not-for-profits is very sort of structured and committee. They're not advisory boards in the true sense because they
Yeah,
don't take advantage of what advisory boards can offer. They don't take advantage of really saying, where are our needs? Do we need
yeah,
help in talent? Do we need help in finance? Do we need help in business development? Who can we bring on our board that
yeah,
has the skills, but also is aligned with the mission of our organization? And more importantly, will we listen to them? And so my experience for-profit advisory boards has been mostly with organizations that are kind of, I would say, mid-size. So,
yep,
so kind
yep.
of anywhere between 150 to 1,000 employees. And, for instance, I have a client that I've worked, as advisor for close to 20 years now, actually, believe it or not. I mean, so they've seen my morphing of my career as well. In the private healthcare field in Canada, which is unusual, but they own multiple clinics across the province of Ontario. And in my role there, I, I, as an advisor, what I've done is I've taken it a little bit farther than just offering sort of advice and questions. I actually facilitate their senior management meeting every month. And so
Mm,
we have it every month. And so I take on a facilitator role to ensure that everybody can get their message across, where they see things going, and it also allows the CEO, who's also a healthcare practitioner who has learned the business. Again, they were an expert in healthcare and then had to learn the business model to sit back and kind of take it in. And people, what happened out of that is people don't feel the pressure of, well, this is what the boss wants. I
right.
won't say this. I push so that people put opinions on the table in a safe element that we can digest those and see what works and what may not work in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's so good,
So
so
it's been
good.
an interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah,
Another
that's
one
really
with a creative firm, they were 150 and I facilitate again, I came to them when they were like the owner wanted an exit and he wanted it quickly. And sitting on the advisory board, I said, it's not going to be, well, you can exit quick, but you're not going to get what you want for it.
right.
Because there's nothing here for anyone. You've got a list of customers, but what's somebody buying? And so we had to spend a few years putting in a lot of structure and making sure we had the right people on the team so that they could offer a full package. And ultimately he did divest that and get it for sale and has now since retired, moved from Ontario out to Whistler, BC. So
Oh,
enjoying
that's
himself.
a great life. So,
Yeah.
when you one of the things you talked about is this sort of perspective you bring, which is talent focused people, but the ecology side of it. So, when you sit on an advisory board, is that a and not I'm not talking about the facilitation part, but you're one of the seats on the advisory board. Is that kind of the thing that you're watching for and listening for? Is how does the people intersect with the systems and processes with this design around here? Is that the place you often sit as an expert on the advisory board, or what's the superpower you bring to bear if you're sitting on that seat?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I I can't help but think strategically.
Yeah.
It just is in my mindset. It's almost the first place I go. I start asking the who, what, why, where questions. What fits with what? I'm looking at where there are gaps. And I think, you know, I don't know if it's a superpower, but sometimes it can work in the opposite way. It's too big picture. But that tends to be what I can offer. Do I have subject matter expertise with working with people and talent? Absolutely. Do I understand, management and motivation? And I've worked for a lot of different organizations, both working in them as well as consulting with them. But I
Yeah.
think being able to think strategically and offer that, and I'm not talking about creating a strategy. That's important too. But just the mindset around people get lost in the micro very, very quickly and they start working on a symptom rather than trying to determine what the cause of that is. And maybe they improve things for a short period of time, but then it literally pops up later in a much worse situation.
Yeah.
And that can be devastating, especially for a smaller organization. It
Yeah.
could even be mission critical, and that could be a real issue. And so I think that's what I bring. I listen a lot. I ask a lot of questions, maybe sometimes too much. But I kind of do it to push people
Yeah.
and I'm not expecting an answer right away. Many times it's like, well, go away and think about this.
Yeah.
And then let's come back at our next meeting and have a conversation about it. And it's trying to get people through that their personal change or their personal belief structure around it. And sometimes, especially for smaller owner operators or founders, they're the ones that are getting in the way of their success. They were
Yes.
really good when they were smaller and they could touch everything. But now that it's expanded, they can't touch everything and they want to. And so they get a lot of energy and reward and achievement, but jumping in and solving this technical problem or this financial problem or talking to customers, which is great, but you're now overseeing an entire organization and that can feel uncomfortable. And so sometimes it's nice to have somebody, you know, I like to think of myself as kind of a strategic guide. So it's nice to kind of have a guide every now and then that you can kind of lean on and go, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
And coaching, I'm sure for you is the same thing. And it's those types of things that I think I offer when I work with advisory boards in that
Beautiful.
perspective.
Well, Alan, this has been delightful and very helpful in terms of thinking about. I love the concept of ecology. I think such a cool concept, and for your perspective on it, but also how you come at thinking as an advisor is really helpful as well. So let's assume a CEO is listening to this, and the concept of ecology sparks something in them. What type of counsel would you give them in terms of considering the importance of it, and the value they can get from like getting an advisor, maybe getting an advisory board, but more importantly, how to think about ecology. What simply would you say to them as a starting place?
I think as a starting place is they have to ask themselves, are they open? They have to look back and reflect. Where have they found their training? What is it more in the traditional MBA business background where that, you're trying to command and control? If
Mm,
that's where you're coming from and you want to go to an ecology perspective, you can't continue to hold that same perspective. You've got to be open to the fact that things I'm not saying they run autonomously, but most people, and certainly people I've met, go to places to work not to slack off, not to get
right.
the most money and not do anything. They want to contribute, they want to add
Yes.
value. But something stops from when they arrive within sometimes in a very short period of time, sometimes in a longer period of time, that then ends up to be that problem employee. And then that becomes the focus of senior management going, you know, but they have to go back and even themselves, like they became CEOs. Why did they become CEOs? What is it that they wanted? They wanted to create something that was different than where they were before. And how do
Yeah.
they put their vision on that? And so if they can't come from that human centric perspective, I'll be upfront with somebody to say, you can continue to do what you do and have fun. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just not going to be a fit for what I can offer you. But it really starts at that senior level. And so that's why I meet with the senior leaders and their senior team and start those discussions and open that up and also kind of explore what's their story, like you've done with me on this podcast. Where did they come from? What did that influence in them? And then how does that serve them moving forward? Or is it something that maybe we need to put that in a bag and just drop that bag? It's no
Right.
longer serving you in the future.
Yeah. So good. Well, I always like to end these conversations with some sort of rapid fire questions, and not many of them, but they're just it's a way to wrap this in terms of the
Wow.
human of you. Yeah, you've come across as this brilliant expert who drinks chai tea, but I still like to have some strange questions just to finish that off. So answer as little as much as you want, but Mac or PC?
Okay. Oh, definitely Mac.
Okay.
No, sorry. My apologies. That was my Freudian slip. I heard my wife Carmen come in. She's the Mac user. I'm the PC user. I have to work at a university there, not Mac work.
Oh, right. So you're sort of a split family. That's interesting.
I had
What
a split family, but I have very little understanding of the Mac world.
got it? Okay, so what book has most significantly shaped you more than any other? And I realize that's a massive question because I know you're a deep learner. But is there
Wow.
a book that has had a profound influence in your entire life?
I would say a book that's a great question, by the way. I think because I'm an active reader,
Yep.
and as you know, I think that's how one of the things when you came to interview me for your TV show, you spent most of your time looking at my bookshelf and you kind of like, we read the same stuff. Um, I think, and this is going to sound bizarre, but it's The Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Turk.
Yep.
That book to me is I've read it numerous times. Every time I read it, I get something more from it, but it's a great philosophical discussion about the concept of quality and what it means to you and how to live a quality life. And so I think it's not a business book per se. It just resonates with me.
Beautiful. What was the first question you asked Chat GPT?
Well, the first question, that's funny you say that because last fall I had to because I work in a university environment, it was really coming on. I actually was giving it some prompts to see if it could complete an assignment that I felt the student had used it to complete the assignment, to see if they actually were using it. And I verified that they did. And so, unfortunately for that student, they ended up with an academic integrity charge on their transcript because it's using a third party source that they didn't source as part of that process. But it is interesting. I have another colleague that has really embraced this, Matt, who I teach with, and he's at another college, but he teaches at McMaster part time in one of the courses that I run, entrepreneurial thinking and innovation. And he's developed a whole thing for educators on how to teach them how to do prompts more effectively
Mm.
to build assignments and quizzes and case studies. And so he's put a whole little training platform together, and I'm starting that process this coming month to go through that. So I'm
Oh,
looking
cool.
forward to it.
That's delightful. What was the last thing you completely nerded out on? Like completely nerded out that
Completely.
yeah, the last thing. The very last thing you completely went kind of dove down the rabbit hole and nerded out on it.
Well, I mean, it would be probably coming up with a pulley system to hang my racing canoes in my garage. So I use old climbing hardware and pulleys and prussics to pull my canoes up so they rest up above my car, and then I can just unhook them and uncleat them and bring them down. So,
Beautiful. Well, my friend, this has been delightful. I have learned a lot, and I appreciate you sharing. And we will make sure that we give people ways to connect with you on LinkedIn and anywhere else.
yeah.
Where what else would you say as we complete this conversation? anything you want to direct people to, or recommendations, or anything as we conclude?
Well, I mean, if they want to connect with me, LinkedIn is the best way to do that. I don't actually have a website because most of the work that I get from a guiding perspective is related to word of mouth. So that's the best way to reach me. And if you want to look at a company that gets it, uh, especially if you're in the U.S., Patagonia.
Mm,
Yvon Chouinard, it is a good example of a mid-sized company working in a very competitive industry, garment manufacturing and retailing, in a very niche market that gets it. I don't know if you know, but he is, rather than selling the firm, he has sold it to nature. And so he's created a trust. So all the profits moving forward don't go to his family, don't go to any shareholders. They go to nature foundations. So pretty cool.
interesting.
But
Well, my
he's a
friend,
great example of connecting it all together.
yeah. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you being on the
Yeah.
show.
Great to reconnect, Tom. Thanks so much for having me.